Hi, I'm Ron Mulvey and welcome to Mastering Wet. I'm going to show you today how wet paper and paints work together to produce beautiful little landscapes with very little effort. There's a certain magic about watercolors, and you're going to discover that today. I discovered it years ago and it changed the way I painted. There are different ways to paint watercolors, but this wet technique is really one of the best. So you're going to need about 3 brushes, a flat brush, a small brush for details, and of course a larger brush to do the big washes. Arches 140-pound paper. Let's get started. Of course, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to wet the paper. That's my little sketch. That's what I've done before to get ready for this painting. It's always good to have a thumbnail. I'm going to cover everything up with a paper towel, and then I'm going to take my spritzer and I'm going to liberally wet the paper. The tape is pressed down so that when I remove the tape, it gives me a nice white edge, but also it keeps the paper from buckling. Now the paper's wet, and I'm going to give it a little bit of time to soak in. Give it about a minute or two. Okay, the water is now in the paper, but there may be some on top. So we tap it with a paper towel to take off any surface water. We want the water in the paper, not sitting on top of the paper. The water in the paper will allow the paint to mix very easily. So there's the 2 main brushes. I'm going to use the larger Neptune brush because I want the big areas to be done first, and I've selected some manganese blue. You could use cobalt blue, you could use ultramarine blue, but I like manganese because it's a very pure sky blue. It's just a blue I really like. So notice that I'm just checking to see if I got the right amount of paint, right? We got 3 clouds, three sections. First section, just touch it to the paper. Second section, and now we end up with 3 sections of white. A little scoop on the left. You can see I'm following my sketch. Now the bottom, straight across, back and forth, just lightly. Now here we go. Next thing is I'm going to be taking some alizarin crimson. It's a very pure red, and it's a stainer color, which means it'll be penetrating right into the paper. So selecting the right amount of paint is important. First, get the paint on your brush and then see if you need to thin it a little bit. I don't want this to be too strong, but I want my brush loaded with the right consistency. So there's my violet. Manganese blue and alizarin crimson make a great sky violet. Now this is the part where you might be a little nervous. Don't be. The paper's wet. Look at that. You go, oh no, I have to let that. What do I do to that? Nothing. Just put it on and watch. Watch. It's going to dribble. It's going to drip. It's going to diffuse, it's going to spread, it's going to work its own magic. That's what we're trying to discover, the magical elements of making a chicken in the sky. I know it looks like a chicken, but it won't be a chicken for too long. That's why we watch. Things change. This type of painting is very, very much do less and watch more. Think more, paint less. You'll notice I'm not really doing much. Now the chicken seems to have turned into a heart, which I like. I thought that was just one of those beautiful little happy accidents that we tend to overlook when we're painting. We're just softening edges with my small sable brush. And one more swipe, always working 3. 3 is a great number. 3 spaces in the sky, 3 clouds, and now comes the bottom part. I'm going to get my flat brush now. 3 brushes so far. A fairly medium-sized brush, a small brush, and now the flat brush. Now what I've done is I've added more blue to the alizarin. Now slowly go across. The arches has a bit of texture, or what we call tooth, and the paint settles down in the little recesses, and the top part of the paper stays nice and clean. Well, this will give me a beautiful texture for the trees. Notice the bleeding. Bleeding's when the paint starts to penetrate into another wet area. But look at that sky. Isn't that amazing? It's just, what did we do there? Very little. We didn't fuss and we didn't muss and we didn't rub our brush. The wet technique allows you to put the paint on and move forward. So I just took a little Payne's gray there. Payne's gray will give you a darker shade to a color. So if you have a blue, it'll make a darker blue, a red, a darker red. Don't usually add it to yellow, but it does darken up the blues and reds. So I'm really making sure that I get the right consistency. Got my sable brush. And I've tilted the board up slightly, so the paint runs down now. I don't want the paint running too far into the sky. Just little dabs and little taps. You can almost see the trees forming all by themselves. Now I've noticed that, so I'm going to add a little bit more paint there. Now if my board wasn't tilted, the paint may run up too fast and too high. Now I'm starting to think, okay, I can see one shape on the left side needs to be darker than the shape behind it and on the right side. So I continue to add more of the Payne's gray and the blue and red section to the bottom and to the right hand side. What's coming up here is a phthalo green. This is the next color you're going to need. Now you can make your own green if you'd like. I like phthalo green because it's very much of a stainer color. So now I'm going to intermittently throw in a few little spots of green. As you know, or may not know, green and violet absolutely work together beautifully. You see it in nature all the time. Violet flowers, green leaves. So now I've taken my tiny brush, it's a little sable brush, any soft hair brush, and the paper's still a bit damp, so I'm feathering the edge here with a stipple stroke. Notice I'm really not painting so much as I'm adding. This kind of painting is additive. You're not rubbing the brush and trying to make the paint do something. You're adding paint to the paper, which is wet, and the paper is doing the work for you. So you can start to see little trees and mountains forming there. All we have to do now is go to the next step. What is the next step? Gradually just refining edges and creating depth. In order to create depth, you need to have things dark and you need to have things light. So a little more of that phthalo green, mix them together, and pop in some little strokes with that teeny brush. Now remember, they're going to feather themselves into the wet paper. So even though they're going on with a little bit of a hard edge, give them a few moments and they'll start softening out. So I mixed the blue and the alizarin and a little bit of Payne's gray, and now I'm really adding a dark mixture. It's not going to stay this dark because the paper is still wet. But you can see I'm adding a right-hand side and a left-hand side, giving it some shape. If you make things dark on the bottom and light on the top, they'll appear to have depth. Just continue with that small brush, adding dark paint, and it keeps soaking into the paper. But you can see it's coming across there nicely. And now a little lighter in the background. There's another mountain range or tree range behind the dark ones in the foreground. We're just tapping a little bit of paint here and there with a small brush. Keeping it round, like the clouds. We haven't looked at the clouds for a while. Take a look at them. The shapes in the clouds look like the shape in the mountain. Round shapes. A couple little dark accents here. Look how those blend right in. It's a wonderful way to paint, and it's the texture of the paper, the arches, cold press. That's what gives you the tree effect. If you had very smooth paper here, you wouldn't get the same effect. So there we go. We've got our mountains in, and we're adding some roundness to the mountains. And really, I haven't used that many colors. I don't think I've even touched the yellow. You might say there was a little yellow in the green. Okay, next up, we're going to be adding a few more touches to the clouds, and we're going to remove the tape. Okay, here comes the tape. Make sure you pull the tape to the left, on the left side, and pull it down. Don't pull it straight across. You see we have a few bleeds there. Don't worry about that. This paper is easy to fix up. I'll be getting a razor blade and just scraping that right off. You won't even notice it. So pull the tape up. The paper is completely dry now, so it's lost all its moisture, and you can see the dark sections worked out pretty clear. So here's my little utility blade. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It's done. This paper is fairly thick. It's 140 pounds. And you can scrape down. Even this is easy to take off, even though it has their stainer colors. There's enough paper there for you to scrape off any bleed marks. Okay, make sure your brush is clean. This is a little tricky. Don't be afraid to try this. You just take your brush with damp water, damp it up, take your time, let it soak in gently into the paper. This little touch will put your painting a little more into the area of depth. It won't look so flat. So here we go. We have a little bit of violet on the brush. I switch to a small brush and I just drop it in. And then I watch it. You can see where the paper's dry, I want to feather out the dampness. If you don't do that, you'll get a bleed mark. So they're just gently feathering out the water on the edges. It's very subtle. You don't have to do a lot, but these small additions really put your painting up a notch. Makes it look more professional and more interesting. So here we are, we're using the phthalo blue and we're using the alizarin crimson. Now that paper is wet. You see, I have another little piece of paper I'm checking it on. Now there it's going in nicely. Now this is on dry paper. You can do it with dry paper as long as you feather out the edges with a damp brush. And you'll get relatively the same effect. So there's two ways to do it. Using wet. Mastering wet is what watercolor is all about. I suppose that's why they call it watercolor. And now I'm adding a little more because I'm watching how the paint is diffusing or spreading. And remember we said 1, 2, 3. We got to take that little cloud down near the bottom. but very gently and with just a whisper of the alizarin crimson. And just rub it in gently. That paper's bone dry. We didn't add any water there. So the big cloud got water. The cloud on the right was dry, and the edges were feathered with a damp brush. And now you can see we're going to be doing something here. We're going to take it and check it. We're going to go to the top of the picture where the paper's bone dry, and we're going to put in a wash. You see, I'm trying to get a little bead there where the water and the paint collect. Then I come at it from underneath it, not right at it, but from the dry paper underneath. And then we just spread it around. And we'll get a nice little dark section at the top of the sky, which gives us gradation, contrast, dark to light. Just tap it in. You know, that doesn't look like much, but it really does add something to the painting. Now there's what we call a little bold stroke. I just took that manganese blue and just did a little stroke over that cloud, and now I'm going to feather it out. Put a little paint on, do a little thinking, move the paint around. These are the finishing touches when you're doing a wet painting. We're working on dry paper, and we're finished. I really enjoyed doing this, and I think you'll enjoy it too. I tried it a couple times. I mean, I play around, and then when I feel confident, I go for it.